what we do, what all of you do in your communities and in your work is really a part of the national purpose, right? But it's not understood that way. And that's sort of where the National Assembly and others began to look at what we're saying and how it's being received by the public. I could give you a litany of the challenges out there. You all know them. But let me just cite one. And that is that the percent of non-defense discretionary spending, what a term, that goes, the percent of the GDP that goes to domestic spending essentially is at the lowest rate it's been at in decades. Thank you. It's at the lowest rate that it's been at in decades, at about 2.6 of GDP. Look at that and look at the fact that the funding that we use to serve people comes under the label of discretionary. And you know that we've really not made it into the big leagues of national purpose. And how do we move into that? The National Assembly is an association of about 80 of the leading national organizations in human services, including the Alliance, happily. And we began to realize that that was a critical issue a few years ago as we were advocating for public policies on the national level and finding that one program was being pitted against the other, that we really weren't getting through to public officials. And if we're not getting through to public officials, we're not getting through to the public, because that's who informs public officials, in an ideal world at least. So we were able to secure some funding to engage the Frameworks Institute to really understand the social science of framing, not new messaging. If you leave today thinking that I've talked about new messaging, you've only gotten part of the issue. The real challenge here is to imbue in human services, to have the public understand human services as something that they need to invest in and to be a part of and to take advantage of. It's not just for those people, it's for all people. It's not just for the people who are immediately served, it's also for whole communities. It really builds communities. So we tip our hat to the Kresge Foundation and the Annie E. Casey Foundation and to the Frameworks Institute, which did most of this research. So we use terms like safety net. And we talk about human services in the best possible ways. We say that human services are supports that are needed by the most vulnerable in our societies. Right? Great argument. And perfectly legitimate. And we assume that that argument's going to carry the day. I remember in the settlement house movement where I got started, you know, if we were not getting the funding and the support from the city council that we needed, we'd take busloads of people and we'd talk about waiting lists and we'd talk about helping the most vulnerable. Well, at the end of the day, it didn't make a lot of difference. So we're saying those great arguments and other people are thinking, well, I don't know, maybe Meals on Wheels for certain populations, for the elderly or people with disabilities, but everybody else really ought to work. They ought to make their own way in society. And we represent that kind of thing, but it's not understood that what we do is really a pathway to that. So there's a big disparity between what many in the public understand about human needs and human services and what we know to be the truth. We use terms like safety net, and that's a term that's almost sacred in the nonprofit sector, right? We figure if we, you know, I remember in the wake of the 07-08 economic downturn that a lot of us said, hey, the safety net's being strained, this is a big issue, and we thought that would carry the day. It doesn't really carry the day because some people view the safety net as this. And if you think that is far-fetched, this was a political cartoon that was making the rounds in that period. We can't let the safety net become a hammock. And it shows a political leader, presumably, cutting off the moorings of the hammock, the safety hammock. It isn't far-fetched. And if you think about the way that human needs, human services have been talked about in political campaigns, there's one word that comes up: entitlement. We know it's not true, but that's how it's understood. And it's not political. These things tend to go beyond the political forces. Part of the issue is human services are really hard to understand. We in this room understand that assortment of programs and needs and populations and bureaucracies and policies. But what does the public understand? And through this research, we've been able to ask the public in a variety of ways, in scientific surveys and sidewalk intercepts and all of that. So think about how you think the public would respond if you asked them, what do you think of when you hear the term human services? Here are the responses. The leading response is And then we're confused with terms like human resources, human relations. You mean like health? And the closest we get, which is sort of a good thing, is you mean like the Red Cross. These are actual responses from thousands and thousands of people who really don't understand what we are and what we're talking about, and the great value that human services provide. And so again, I say, this is about messaging, but it's about more. It's about mobilizing. It's about helping people understand the real value of human services. The research allowed us, and this is really kind of a busy one, and there is a publication called Mapping the Gaps that you can get from the National Assembly on this subject. But it looked at how experts in the field, people like us, academics, providers, bureaucrats, funders, understand human needs and human services, and compared on a variety of issues, and compared that with how the public views. And we did big surveys and so forth to get input from the public about these different issues. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. And one of the most telling is about what are the causes of, what really precipitates the needs for human services. And the public tends to view it as individual human weakness and failing. And the same thing plays in terms of responsibility. Who's responsible? Well, the individual, the bootstraps, right? Whereas we as experts understand that it's also structural. It's about policy, it's about society and so forth. So big gap to fill. We've entered the subject, the concept of framing. And I really commend to you the website of the Frameworks Institute if you really want to understand framing. It is a piece of the social science, and it really is about not just picking new terms by consensus. If that were what we were going to do, we could do that today. We could have roundtables, we could discuss what do you think is a better way of talking about safety net and all of that. But it really is about testing and looking at research, doing research to say, how do people understand? And it begins with values. And what the research indicates, that there are 3 values that really people relate to, that can be aligned with human needs and human services in a positive way to gain understanding. One is opportunity, another is prosperity, and the third is human potential. So maybe we're talking, instead of about a safety net, we're talking about an on-ramp to opportunity. We're talking about prosperity and the opportunity to move forward. So that's what you build a new frame on. But the other piece of framing is a metaphor. And the metaphor that tests well is constructing or building well-being. That if we talk about human development in these terms, people can relate and can say, I get that. It's something that requires a strong foundation. It requires a good structure. It requires a lot of different forces and people in the community to help bring together the resources and to build them. It requires ongoing maintenance. What a perfect metaphor. And in my original version of this presentation, I had another slide with another metaphor that they were testing. It didn't work. It was brilliant, we thought, but it didn't work. And that's the critical thing, the difference between messaging and framing. In framing, you really do the research to find out what resonates, because that's our ultimate objective. So building the frame, and this is something you all can be a part of, and you need to be a part of. And I'm happy to say I already hear much of this language at the Alliance conference. We go from talking about problems to talking about solutions. And within that, opportunity, prosperity, and human potential. We go from talking about safety net and the litany of dire statistics. Don't do that. If you overwhelm people with data, the result is you've overwhelmed them. Move to talking about constructing well-being and the elements it takes to build well-being. And talk about the fact that it is the responsibility of all of us, and the benefit is to all of us. Because one of the other big divides is that the public tends to view human services in terms of the individual responsibility and the individual benefit, when we know it is the community that benefits, it's society that benefits. What we're doing now, and we invite you to be a part of, is to go from this new frame. Again, write me. I know the Alliance will be disseminating the messaging memo in the toolkit very, very shortly, as soon as they get it, to their great network, because they're a great participant in this process. To go from using the old language and the old things that we're comfortable with, that we think work but aren't tested, to using the new. And we think that we can make this a movement building from the service sector. We are a powerful force in American society. If we talk to our staff and we engage our staff in the new language, and we engage our volunteers and our boards and our clients, we start talking differently, start advocating differently, start marketing differently, using opportunity and prosperity, human potential, building well-being, we can influence popular culture. And if we influence popular culture, we can influence policymakers. Thank you so much.